Cleopatra actually looked like has fascinated students of her life for 2,000 years. The ancient sources insist that Caesar and Antony were so passionate about her that they undermined or even entirely derailed their political careers to support her interests, which encourages us to imagine her as a woman beautiful enough to rival Helen of Troy. There are problems with this assumption. Firstly, beauty is very much in the eye of the beholder. Even if the ancient sources had described her as beautiful, that might have meant something different to our idea of beauty today. In fact, Plutarch, the only ancient author to describe Cleopatra, actually says in chapter 27 of his Life of Antony that her beauty, so we are told, was not itself outstanding. It did not immediately strike those who saw her. He goes on to explain that her personality and voice were her most attractive qualities. Secondly, Cleopatra, like Elizabeth I and many other rulers and politicians, carefully managed her image so that it gave a particular impression of her to her chosen audience. Cleopatra came to the throne of Egypt in around 51 BCE, succeeding her father Ptolemy XII Auletes. Her priority was to rule with as little reference to her younger brother and co-ruler Ptolemy XIII as possible. She needed to be seen as a strong, legitimate ruler in her own right. Here we have a silver coin minted at some point during Cleopatra's reign. On the front, her head is shown in profile. The portrait is easily recognisable as Cleopatra from her distinctive melon bun hairstyle. She's wearing the diadem, a broad white ribbon, to show that she is the queen. Her facial features are quite prominent, a hooked nose and strong chin. If we look at a coin of Cleopatra's father, we can see the reason for this. Her portrait is designed to make her look as much like her father as possible, emphasising that she is his rightful heir. Ptolemy Auletes' coin has the eagle and thunderbolt of Zeus on the back, suggesting the god's favour towards the Ptolemaic dynasty. Cleopatra's coins had exactly the same design, with her name and title in Greek. Cleopatra's portrait on her coins is entirely Greek in style. The Ptolemies were originally from Macedon. Ptolemy I was one of Alexander the Great's generals, who took control of Egypt after Alexander's death in 323 BCE. Much of the population of Alexandria, the capital city of Egypt, was Greek or Macedonian in origin, so it's not surprising to see Cleopatra portraying herself in Greek style and with the traditional symbols of a Greek-style monarch. Next, we see a bust thought to be of Cleopatra as a young woman, which has the same facial features and hairstyle as we saw on the coin, but no diadem. It is possible that the bust dates from before Cleopatra inherited the throne, but the lack of diadem has caused some historians to think that this might be an Alexandrian noblewoman imitating Cleopatra's hairstyle instead. However, another bust, which does feature the diadem, looks very similar. There were still plenty of Egyptians in Egypt, however, and Cleopatra made an effort to gain their support too. Plutarch tells us that she was the first Ptolemy to speak Egyptian. She also continued her father's temple building program in the south of Egypt. In 51 BCE, Cleopatra participated in an important Egyptian religious ritual, the consecration of the new Bukis bull at Hermonthis near Thebes. The bull was believed to be the living representation of the Egyptian war god Montu and the gods Re and Osiris. This was a great opportunity for Cleopatra to travel to Upper Egypt and show herself to her people for the first time, particularly since she could also show that she was respectful of their religion. On this stele, Cleopatra is described as the queen, the lady of the two lands, the goddess who loves her father. The pharaoh shown alongside the sacred bull may be her brother or her father. Another stele, also from the early years of Cleopatra's reign, actually shows her as a male pharaoh making an offering to Isis, her patron goddess, and describes her as the sole ruler of Egypt. Cleopatra's oldest son and heir, Caesarion, began to be portrayed alongside his mother early in his life. A bronze coin minted in Cyprus portrays Cleopatra as Aphrodite, the Greek goddess of love, with a baby Caesarion in her arms as Eros. Portraying Cleopatra as the goddess may have been intended to connect the queen to local culture, since Aphrodite was supposed to have been born on Cyprus. There was also a well-established link between Aphrodite and Isis. Furthermore, Cyprus had been given back to Egypt by Caesar in 48 BCE, and this coin alludes to him as Caesarion's father, since Caesar's family claimed to be descended from Venus, the Roman equivalent of Aphrodite. Caesar himself encouraged this connection between Venus/Aphrodite and Cleopatra by placing a statue of Cleopatra in the temple of Venus the Ancestress in his new forum in Rome. The back of this coin shows two cornucopiae, horns of plenty symbolising abundance and fertility, bound by a ribbon. This design may have been chosen to mark Caesarion's birth in about 47 BCE, but this isn't certain since the coin is not dated. The text around the image reads Queen Cleopatra in Greek. This coin very clearly celebrates Cleopatra's fertility and the future prosperity and strength of her country. Caesarion's birth was extremely useful to Cleopatra, since it made her identification with Isis more credible. This black basalt statue portrays Cleopatra as Isis. Close association with Isis was an extremely important part of Cleopatra's image in Egypt. It made her more awe-inspiring. It was a tradition for the mother of the pharaoh to be linked with Isis, and other Ptolemaic queens had done so before her. But the goddess's story suited Cleopatra's situation particularly well. Isis was the wife of Osiris, in legend the first king of Egypt, who was murdered by their brother Set. Set cut up Osiris's body and distributed the pieces all over Egypt. Isis gathered up the pieces and breathed life back into Osiris's body. Their son Horus was born soon afterwards. If Cleopatra was Isis, then Caesar, murdered by his friends, was obviously Osiris. Caesarion thus neatly became identifiable with Horus the hawk god. Isis was a major goddess in Egyptian religion, but also had Greek and Roman worshippers. She had many important roles. She was the ideal wife and mother and protected women in childbirth. By Cleopatra's time, she was believed to organise the seasons, guaranteeing a good harvest. She also oversaw the sea and sailing, which was important in Alexandria, which had the deepest, busiest harbour in the Mediterranean. Isis was an excellent goddess for Cleopatra to identify herself with, since it suggested that she was the perfect mother of her people. One of our most important images of Cleopatra is the relief of her and Caesarion on the south wall of the temple of Hathor at Dendera. This large relief shows the king and queen making offerings to the Egyptian gods. Caesarion as male pharaoh is more prominent than his mother, who follows dutifully behind him. Horus, in the form of a falcon, hovers above Caesarion's head protectively. Cleopatra holds the sistrum rattle associated with Isis and a headdress also connected with the goddess. Even though Caesarion was certainly not an adult when this relief was created, he is shown as an adult king, the strong ruler of the future. In this relief, we see Cleopatra and her son portrayed as traditional Egyptian rulers, devoutly worshipping the Egyptian gods, which was intended to strengthen the bond between the Ptolemies and their Egyptian subjects. Like the stelae we looked at earlier, the Dendera relief isn't a personal portrait of Cleopatra at all. She looks the same as any other Egyptian queen. Our last source moves us on to 32 BCE, when Cleopatra and Mark Antony were on the verge of war with Octavian. This silver denarius, minted by Antony, shows a portrait of him on the front and his ally Cleopatra on the back. Antony's side also features the tiara, or high crown, of the Armenian king, and the text of Antony, Armenia defeated. Cleopatra wears her diadem, and the text around her head reads, of Cleopatra, Queen of Kings, and of her sons who are kings, which echoes the wording of the donations of Alexandria in 34 BCE. The prow of a ship can be seen faintly in front of her. The message of this coin is quite simple. Antony and Cleopatra are firm and equal allies. He supports her and her children's claim to rule Egypt and the other lands he has given to her. In return, Cleopatra supports Antony with her fleet. The double portrait may also suggest that Cleopatra paid for the coinage to be issued. So, whenever we see a portrait of Cleopatra, we need to think about its purpose and audience. To her Greek subjects, Cleopatra advertised her place in the Ptolemaic dynasty and the legitimacy this gave her rule. To her Egyptian subjects, she stressed her respect for traditional religion and custom and her role as pharaoh. To both, she promoted her association with Isis, the ultimate mother goddess, and promised the future greatness of Egypt under her son Caesarion. To the wider Mediterranean world at the end of the 30s BCE, she was a mighty monarch, ally and equal of the Roman triumvir Mark Antony. As a result of this manipulation of her portrait, however, it is very difficult to say for sure what Cleopatra actually looked like.